So I'm going to start sharing my desktop, and in a second you should see my desktop appear. And what you see in front of you is what we call a concept map. And this concept map will be a little bit familiar to those of you who were at our first webinar in the series, but this is the visual that we'll be using in our first presentation in Ashanti Johnson's presentation. I just want to let you know that you'll have this concept map available to you after the webinar. We'll send you a link to it. And when you visit it, you can explore some of the attached resources. So each concept is a shape on the map, and with each shape you can click on associated resources. For example, that particular concept had 2 PDF documents attached to it. One is the what, why, and how of a postdoc position, and another is about how to position yourself for a positive postdoc experience. So I encourage you, when you get a link to this concept map, to dive in and take a look at some of the resources that are attached to the concepts. I also wanted to mention that there are some topics here in gray, the different types of postdoc positions available, how to prepare early for a postdoc position, and questions to ask while you are exploring postdoc positions. These are topics that we covered in our previous webinar, and we're not going to cover them in depth today, but you can visit the archive video of our previous webinar to review those topics. And we'll send you a link to that as well after today. So I just want to let you know those are on the map, but we're not actually going to review those topics. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to our first speaker, Ashanti Johnson from IBP.
Hello, everyone. Before we get started about talking about negotiating a postdoc position, I just wanted to give an overview of a few key concepts related to postdoc positions. So first, quickly, what is a postdoc? A postdoc is a placement for the purpose of gaining scientific, technical, or other professional skills that advance your career. It's temporary in nature, usually lasting from 1 to 5 years, depending upon your discipline and the type of postdoctoral position. The heart of a postdoc is full-time research. A postdoc position should give you the opportunity to do in-depth research, to gain new research skills, knowledge, and to publish and present your research findings. Most postdocs provide other professional support and experience, or even teaching, mentoring, and professional development opportunities. And ideally, a postdoc position is also an opportunity to learn grant writing and publication skills under the advisement of your postdoc mentor. Also, a postdoc position will give you a chance to hone your presentation skills as you represent your home institution in presenting research at professional conferences or in publishing findings. Postdoc positions may also involve supervising junior lab members at your institution. Less commonly, postdoc positions may involve opportunities for teaching and mentoring undergrad and graduate students. So, why even consider a postdoc, and how do you know if it's for you? Well, in many fields of life sciences, physics, and chemistry, a postdoc is an essential prerequisite for a career doing research in that field. So I encourage you to talk to your advisor, faculty members, and fellow graduate students about whether a postdoc position is necessary or required in your field. Examine your own career goals and do research about whether a postdoc position is necessarily or desirable to meet those goals. Since a postdoc position is focused on research, you should ask yourself whether you have the passion for research that will keep you happy in a 1 to 5 year research-based position. Now, because the focus of this webinar is on negotiating your postdoc positions, I'm not going to go into all the details on topics from preparing and applying to a postdoc position or questions to ask your research postdoc positions. However, you will have access to this concept map after the webinar is over, as Liv mentioned, and you can explore these topics independently. Also, we'll send you a link to our previous webinar, which was focused on preparing and applying for a postdoc position and has much more detailed information on these topics. For now, let's go ahead and talk about negotiating a position. So why should you consider negotiating a position at all? Well, your postdoc placement is a professional employment position. Taking a proactive stance and giving yourself a strong starting point will allow you to be more productive over the long term. Your negotiation skills are a skill set that can serve you well over the length of your career, so starting early is beneficial. And research shows that individuals who negotiate their first starting salary can increase their lifetime earnings by more than $500,000. So what then do you actually negotiate? Well, this may involve thinking in terms of a full compensation package rather than just a salary figure. A compensation package would include other things like benefits, cost of living, lab arrangements, and research support. I want to point you to a PDF handout we have attached to the concept map, which we'll share with you after the webinar. It contains a nice checkbox list of items you may want to think about in regards to the negotiation process. Okay, so what is the first step? The first step is to do some research. You want to know the average salary ranges for the positions in your field. Some sources of that information include professional associations, the Chronicle of Higher Education, or the Collegiate Times, which has an online database of salaries for some public universities. Some positions have a salary that is indicated by institutional or funding agency guidelines. With these positions, you may not be able to negotiate salary, and you should know this when you apply. You also need to prepare by deciding upon your own expectations. For example, what conditions can you accept and what are deal breakers for you? Think creatively about what is possible and acceptable for you, and also have your personal priorities established. Once you receive an offer, that is the time you may enter into actual negotiation process. First, respond saying how pleased you are to receive the offer, and also clarify aspects of the offer if necessary. If you don't have a written version of the offer, ask for that, and also ask for how long you have to decide. Then take some time to think about it. If you decide to negotiate, treat the negotiation process as a problem-solving exercise and as a search for mutual gain. Basically, think of it as a conversation. You should be straightforward and honest, and throughout the process convey your enthusiasm for the position and the institution. Listen carefully and understand your potential mentor's objectives and constraints. You don't want to press on matters beyond his or her control. However, you can certainly think creatively about solutions that can meet both of your needs and ensure that you'll be happy in the position. Then once again, once the negotiations are complete, reiterate the final offer as you understand it, and ask for that final offer in writing so that you both have a written confirmation of the decision. Then make your final decision. If you ultimately do not accept, still explain why tactfully and constructively, leaving them with a positive impression of you. Remember that even if you don't accept a position, these are still your future colleagues, and this scientific world is really small.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Okay.
We will now hear from Dr. Krug.
Hello, everybody. I want to talk about 5 things about being a postdoc. Number 1 is, how does being a postdoc compare with being a graduate student? What are the similarities? What are the differences? And that you see here is that in graduate school, the main thing you learn is how to solve a problem. You come into graduate school with a passion for science that you learn somewhere else with another faculty member, and that experience usually is not mimicked in graduate school, but it got you there, and that's what everybody's happy about. And during the course of your PhD studies, you're going to find out that what's required for fundamental knowledge, what are the type of experimental designs, controls, how to access the literature, things like that. That's wonderful, and everybody should do it, in my opinion. But a postdoc is actually something where you really are starting to learn how to live as a scientist. And it can be, I use the term scientist as somebody who's more of a scholar rather than a researcher. A researcher, in my mind, is somebody who works at the bench all the time. A A scientist is somebody who actually goes to the library and reads literature and discusses different parts of science with their colleagues. My screen just went blank too. Pardon me while I reboot. Okay. It's the kind of thing that when you go home at night, you're going to continue to think about science and your research project because you like your science and your research project, not because you're done with the day's work. The next thing I'd like to talk, let me see. On this particular same slide, in terms of finding somebody to work with, there are two wonderful websites that you should become familiar with to help you find out who is funded, because part of being a postdoc is learning how to fish for funding. If you like biomedical research, the site is NIH Reporter. You can just Google that. It's NIH Reporter. If you like more fundamental sciences, physics, astronomy, then you want to look at NSF FastLane. These are both public repositories of funded researchers, grants that are out there, and it tells you a lot not only about who has money, but about the science they do and about the way they think. Now, the next slide. There's a formal definition that NIH and NSF goes by for a postdoctoral researcher, and many universities have adopted it. And I'll read it because it's so important. A postdoctoral researcher is an individual who has received a doctoral degree or equivalent, some terminal degree, sometimes an MD, a DDS, and is engaged in a temporary and defined period of mentored advanced training to enhance professional skills and research independence needed to pursue his or her chosen career path. I'd like to go through each of these key words individually now. On the next slide, you'll see that not all institutions view postdocs the same way. If you look at benefits, meaning it's more of a job, you don't see a lot of difference between the benefits available to postdocs at institutions of different size populations of postdocs. The institution that has the highest number of postdocs is Harvard. It has over 5,500 postdocs. And they go down to institutions that have as few as one. You can imagine the culture is very different in those institutions. But what really you want to look at is the larger institutions tend to adhere much more to the definition of a postdoc, and they have time limits, and they also provide more professional development activities. And so you want to ask about those when you go negotiate your postdoc. On the next slide, we talk more about the professional skills aspects of this. And yes, the next slide's fine, thank you. Yeah, the National Postdoctoral Association, it has been in existence for about 11 years now. And next slide, please. They're an outstanding advocate for making the postdoctoral training be a training period and not simply a low-paying job. I encourage all of you to become a member of it. It costs $35 a year, I think, to be a member. It has a wealth of resources on the website, something that you can use as an indicator of whether the institution you're going to might be more concerned with your career development, your professional development, is whether or not that institution is a member of the National Postdoctoral Association. There are approximately 180 member institutions, and you can find them listed on the website. Something, in addition to developing a very informative definition of postdoc, the National Postdoctoral Association also developed core competencies for postdoctoral training. So as you'll see, there are 6 areas listed here that are actually applicable to almost any career that you would want to go into. You have to have some core knowledge. You're going to have some skills that allow you to access and use that knowledge. And you're going to have to communicate properly. You're going to learn different degrees of professionalism. management skills, and what's very appropriate for bench-type scientists is responsible conduct of research. It also applies to engineers, it applies to social scientists, it applies to everybody. These are the research ethics that probably most of you have had in your training as a graduate student. It also is a wonderful place for you to network with your peers or soon-to-be peers. I couldn't say enough good about the National Postdoc Association. On the next slide, you'll see some of what was talked about previously in terms of what are examples of core skills, things like grant writing, manuscript review, presentations, experimental design, teaching, networking, supervising others, conflict resolution. And I put this slide in here because I want you to see that not everybody gets treated the same or has the same opportunities. So you need to talk to the people, a broad spectrum of individuals at the institution where you intend on going to for your postdoc. You'll see that there's a huge difference between the availability of grant writing experience for U.S. postdocs versus internationals. Another is also networking and supervising others. Those are probably the three most important skills sets that you're going to learn. You want to make sure that you have access to them. Next slide. Another good resource that you should become familiar with is the Sigma Xi survey of the postdocs. This was conducted back in 2003 of over 7,000 postdocs nationally. A very thorough survey. And through it, determines some metrics of how impactful different activities are in the success of postdocs in their furthering their career, in having fewer conflicts, in being overall better satisfied with their experience, and in being more productive. And one that is actually perhaps overlooked is teaching. It has postdocs who are engaged in teaching have the highest indicator of subjective success for their postdoctoral training. And it also, ironically, correlates with a better number of publications. People who teach and do research tend to be more organized and manage their time better, and also know how to find resources, and they also know when to say no to more work, and they also know how to be efficient and get to the most important parts of whatever it is they're doing. And you see the other terrible statistics that only 5% of postdocs receive formal training in teaching, with almost 2/3 receiving no training in teaching. And this is something that you need to ask about. Would you have access to teaching techniques course? Are there pedagogy mentors? Is there perhaps are there grants available to you for supporting your efforts in teaching? Can you teach in your major professor or PI's courses? On the next slide, I want to highlight another mechanism for actually finding a postdoc, which is sometimes you don't apply directly to a researcher, a principal investigator. You apply to a program. And the one I think that is by far the best program is the ERACTA program. This is something out of the NIH, the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, and there's 19 institutions. Postdocs who are appointed to these programs are appointed usually for a period of 3 to 4 years, depending on the program. They teach 25% of their time at either an underrepresented, an MSI, or an HBCU institution, and they also have a benefit of an annual week-long conference on professional development and teaching modalities, networking. It is fantastic. Like I say, I could not say enough about this. And it supports your salary for that period of time. So your PI or your mentor is generally pretty happy that you're paying your way through your postdoctoral training. The website is down at the bottom. You can go look at that, and it tells you different aspects about these programs. Another aspect is of the definition is the last part, his or her chosen career path. You may be familiar with the NIH Biomedical Workforce Report that just came out this last summer, and it says that institutions are not doing a very good job in training graduate students and postdocs for multiple career options. And this is a great thing for you guys to be in this environment right now, because all institutions are doing all they can to try to meet the mandate that came from NIH. And so you want to find some place where the core competencies are strongly encouraged and followed, because if you follow the core competencies, you engage in them, you'll develop good transferable skills that will be applicable to any of the careers. Another tool that's come out recently that some of you hopefully have heard about is the MyIDP website hosted at Science Careers. This was developed with AAAS and FASB funding, Burroughs Wellcome, institutions and organizations that are quite concerned about students and postdocs getting adequate training. I've actually done this for myself, and you see part of my assessment up here. This website gives you 3 levels of self-assessment: your interests, your skills, and your values. And then it gives you a potential career match based on how well your scores fit for those careers. Say, for example, you have high interest in being a PI at a research institution, but your skill set in writing publications, in designing experiments, writing grants is very low. You know that you need to make a plan to be able to improve those skills. It also allows you to set up affinity groups of people who have similar interests and values, so that you can help each other progress toward your goals. Next slide, please. This is the thing we all live and die for, which is publications. That is your currency of a scientist. It's the currency of an academic. It's the currency of people going into industry too, because it is a measure of your accomplishment. Surveys that I do every year here, and also that I've compared with colleagues nationally, about 10 to 15% of postdocs have had some issue about authorship that has come up during their postdoctoral training. And what I want you to do is consider the suggestions about authorship policy from the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. These are not rules, but some institutions actually take them as strongly suggested guidelines. But you have to make substantial contributions to the conception and design or acquisition of data, or analysis and interpretation of data, drafting the article or revising it critically for important intellectual content, and final approval of the version to be published. You have to meet all 3 of these conditions according to this panel of experts. Even with this definition, which you can use to discuss with your potential new PI, the phrase substantial contributions is very vague and subject to broadly different interpretations. So you just ask them, to what degree do people have to contribute to be first author? What do you consider substantial for being included as an author? How do you determine when somebody is just being acknowledged versus being on the authorship? These are very important discussions, and your potential new PI will thank you for being aware that this is a source of conflict. It's for them too. Next slide, please. Best times to do it is while you're looking for a job, or for a postdoc position, or when you join the lab is okay, but the worst time, and what most people do, is they wait. They've made too many assumptions that they're going to be first author, and they end up not being first author, and that causes all kinds of problems. Golden rule about any postdoc is to ask. Don't make assumptions. Don't assume that your postdoc position, your postdoc lab, is going to be anything like the way your graduate school laboratory was run, or what your mentor was like. You have to ask critical things that you've learned to be critical issues for you. And on the last slide is really just the bottom line. You know, you can skip this one. You need to go to these resources, but just to finish up here soon. And the last line, the bottom line, in being successful in negotiating for your postdoc and having a successful postdoc, is that you have a mentoring community. These are some resources here that have a lot of tools in them, a lot of things that you'll find useful in looking for your postdoc and negotiating for a postdoc position, in conducting your postdoc, and in looking for your next position afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Crude. We'll now hear from our last speaker, Janika Howard.
Good evening, everyone. So I wanted to just share with you briefly my journey through my postdoc position. I can't emphasize enough, all the speakers have said, but for my selection went a little slow. If you can, and when you're selecting your position or a postdoc, I say start early. Start as early as possible. I unfortunately did not start early. I took a position and then I waited later on to start searching for my postdoc. So there was a period where I didn't have any work, and your mind can grow a little weary and tired. But once you're in that postdoc position and you're being offered the position, I would definitely hone into what your offer letter actually states. For example, if it says that we're going to provide you with relocation allowance, find out what relocation allowance really means. Does it mean that they're going to tie it into your check, or do you need receipts available? Things like that. As far as negotiations are concerned, just remember that you're no longer a doctoral student. You are a professional, and you're obtaining additional experience. So with that mindset, you need to keep your interest in mind as well. You need to not only just look at just things that will help you grow, but look at office space, the supplies that will be provided to you, and even the laboratory and safety equipment that you'll be provided. For me, safety was a big concern. So in our laboratory, we might not have had certain equipment, but if you just make those things aware to the PI and constantly communicate, your needs will be met.
So we'll send you this handout, we'll send you a link to it after the webinar is over, but this is a nice summary of some of the negotiation points that our first speaker, Ashanti, was talking to, kind of why you would consider negotiating. There's a nice checkbox list here. So speaking to what Janika was saying, some of the different elements that you might consider part of the whole package, sort of beyond salary, but some of the other items that you might think about negotiating. And then kind of some tips on the negotiation process and how it could possibly unfold from getting an offer to kind of the communication process of negotiating. And then finally coming out with a final written agreement and offer. So also some nice sort of citations here if you want to read more about that topic. So we'll definitely send you send you a link to this resource after the webinar is over.